It's a short psalm, Psalm 12. Turn there with me if you will. I didn't do slides, so you'll have to follow along the old-fashioned way. Psalm 12. I think I did this one in 2022, if it sounds familiar to you. That's probably why. September 2022. This is a psalm of David, and he says in the first verse, "Help, Yahweh," all caps, Lord, help, Lord, for the godly man ceases. For the faithful disappear from among the sons of men. Well, you see, he uses the personal name of God, signifying one who knows him, and he's crying for help. From someone who needs help to someone who can provide it. And he says, here's the reason he needs help. The godly man ceases. And this is what we see. It's all we see is wicked, immoral people promoting evil in our walk. Outside of when we're here in church, it's seldom that we see people actually acknowledging God and usually behaving as if there is no God in their walk. And it's just the darkness of men. He says there in the last part, for the faithful disappear among the sons of men. And that's when society declines. Under those type of conditions that he's describing here, society inevitably declines. When the salt isn't salty, it has no preservative effect on society. And this is a failure of our churches, and it's a failure to do what we're doing today, getting into the actual Word of God. It has a preservative effect. It doesn't come back empty. And if churches would actually teach the Bible, then this would be less of a problem here. The faithful are disappearing among the sons of men. And when the churches fail to teach the Word of God, then we get evil leaders elected, and then we have anarchy and lawlessness being promoted in society. And it just multiplies on itself the more it's allowed to happen before people turn back to God, because everything's declining. Matthew 5:13-16, Jesus said this to his disciples. He says, "You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it, the earth, be seasoned?" How's the earth going to be seasoned? He goes on to say, "It's then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." Well, wait a minute. He just said you, to his disciples, are the salt of the earth, and if you lose your saltiness, you should be trampled in the streets by men. And that's what we see all over the world. But he goes on in verse 14 of Matthew 5. He says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." This is he's talking about. He's trying to encourage so that it doesn't happen what David is complaining about here in verse 1 of our text. The godly man ceases, the faithful disappearing. Show your good works and glorify your God in heaven, Jesus says. And if you're not salty and you're not a preservative effect in your society anymore, you're of no good to me anymore. You'll be trampled and maybe taken home. So let's not disappear among the sons of men, like it says here in verse 1 of Psalm 12. We can't go on blending in with the unsaved and not preserving them in the process. I mean, if we're the same, we just blend in and we're indistinguishable from the unsaved, like David's complaining about here. The godly man ceases, the faithful man disappears. He doesn't see any out there. If we're indistinguishable, we're just like the tares, and or we are maybe wheat behaving as tares in God's fields. Even though saved, we're behaving as if we were tares, and this is what David's complaining about here. Colossians 4, this is 5 and 6. Paul says, "Walk in wisdom toward those who are outside." That's the unsaved. He says, "redeeming the time," using your time well. Then he says, "let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt," that preservative effect, "that you may know, you may know how you ought to answer each one." Seasoned with salt. Anyway, that's just verse 1. Let's look at verse 2 in our text. It says, "Then they speak idly, everyone with his neighbor, with flattering lips and a double heart they speak." So they are the rest of the sons of men. They speak idly with everyone and his neighbor, and maybe even the ones that are supposed to be the godly men, they speak idly with everyone and his neighbor. You know what they're talking about? Oh, sports, maybe the sitcom, Who Won American Idol last night, some Dancing with the Stars, Scubalon, stuff like that. But with flattering lips and a double tongue they speak. No mention with one another about God and his mercy and his blessings and his glory and his answer to prayer. No, it's just these trivial matters. Idle talk, it says here. They speak idly with their neighbor. What about the praise of God? What about gratitude, thankfulness, and things like this? Proverbs 14:23 says this: "In all labor there is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty." It's kind of a scary verse. And here's a scarier one. Jesus says in Matthew 12:36, "But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment." Wow.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So idle in that verse, exactly what does that mean?
Well, that's a good question.
I'm just wondering because for clarification purposes, your examples were none of them were evil in of themselves.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Worthless speech. Worthless. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm assuming, I don't know if that's true, you just don't want the majority of your speech to be about worthless things that don't matter in the afterlife. They don't have any lasting education.
Correct. I mean, there are secular pursuits that obviously we need to talk about in society, whatever they might be. Like somebody's job might be the coach of a football team, right? And so this is their business. Or whatever the business is, that might be considered idle talk to some. I think it's we all have jobs and other pursuits that and interests and things like this, but when that is your focus and you're entitled. Remember we talked about we've got this carnal side that we pay attention to, and this is what our whole life is, and then we got this little shriveling up raisin over here that's our spiritual side. And I'm talking about myself too. And we need to, we need to grow that side, this idle side over here. I mean, some of it's worthy and not sinful pursuits, right? But it's our carnal side, and we're starving our spiritual side. And I think idle talk is somewhere in between there. It's not, or idle talk maybe the farthest side of the carnal, because there are carnal pursuits that, there are secular pursuits that, for jobs and all kinds of other things, and, even hobbies and things like this, that are not necessarily spiritually focused, right? They're not evil in and of themselves. I'll be watching football this afternoon, and and I like that on Sunday afternoons. But it can't take the place of, like, for example, thankfully the games don't come on at 10 and 11 o'clock, right? They come on at 1 o'clock, right after church is out. But if they didn't, then I'd have to make a choice. But yeah, that is a good question. Where is the line of idle talk? I guess we'll have to leave that to the individual. A lot of this is this flattery of speech to one another, where they're thinking one thing and building up their friend or associate, saying things that they don't necessarily believe themselves, because they're trying to build up somebody else that they really don't like anyway, in the workplace or whatever. This type of idle talk, flattering lips, and a double heart, when you don't really mean it. But when Jesus says this, every idle word men may speak, that's a scary one. And knowing God in his mercy and understanding on us, and he knows we're but clay, he knows we're dust. Much of our idle speech is excused, but like I said, we need to grow our spiritual side. Living as Christians, indistinguishable, like we're talking about here, without the salt, indistinguishable from the rest of them. If that is all we do, like what David's complaining about here, if that's our focus, and we're not distinguishable from the rest of the world, I think that's the situation that we're talking about.
I think gossip too would be a big part of that.
Yeah.
Talking about other people and tearing them down.
Yep.
With
an agenda of your own, laden in repeating a story, for sure. Flattering lips and a double heart, saying one thing to misrepresent what your actual thoughts are. It's the same as lying. The TEV says this: all of them lie to one another. They deceive each other with flattery. But a double heart, that's not good. The ancient Israelites had this problem, and really all mankind is no different. But they're like the poster child for this, like many other things. A heart that's lukewarm to God. It's one that's looking back at the world, looking back at Sodom, like Lot's wife, and missing it. Right after being saved from it, looking back and already missing it. A double heart, it says here. James 1:8. Excuse me. This is James 1:7 and 8. Says this: let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Double-minded, wants to live in this as if he was secular life, but then once a week come to church and pretend to be a Christian, pretend to acknowledge God. Well, this is what the ancient Israelites did. They were up on a hill worshiping an idol on one day, and the next Sabbath day they're in the tabernacle or in the temple. And this double-minded really angered God, and sent his prophet Elijah in 1 Kings 18:21. Remember that scene? We talked about it, I think, last week. Elijah comes to all the people and says, how long will you falter between two opinions? Double-minded, sound like? Falter between two opinions. He says, if the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. You can't do both. You can't serve both. On one day do one, and one day go serve the other one. He says that's not going to fly. In Psalm 119:113, God says, I hate the double-minded. That's a pretty strong speech. So that middle view, that mushy middle moderate, the fence rider, the half-hearted Christian should fear this. Revelations 3:15 through and 16 says, I know your works. Now, this is where God is talking about the different churches, and he characterizes this one. He says, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. You see, they're even worse than the ones who are just denying God. They're pretending to acknowledge him too. And so the fence rider, the moderate, the mushy middle. And there's no room for that in Christianity. That's more obnoxious to God than being an outright God-denying atheist. He spews you out. Away from me, I never knew you. Scary stuff. Mark 7:6 says this. This is Jesus talking, being quoted. He says, well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. He's talking about the religious establishment. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. See, they pretend to acknowledge that their heart is far from them. And this is what he sees, the heart, and he kind of hears what they're saying. He's like, no, the two don't match up. You're double-minded, double-hearted. It's look at this verse 3 now, back in our text in in Psalm 12. He says, may the Lord cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaks proud things. How about that? Flattery, lying, cut off the lips of the liar. And, a lip and tongue removal here is what David's calling for. The tongue that speaks proud things. And there we have that all through the scriptures, both testaments. Pride, not anything that believers in the Bible should ever want anything to do with or be associated with or characterized by. And this is really that self-pride. It's not when you're proud of your son or daughter or grandkid or husband or wife or whatever. When you're proud of it's self-pride that we're talking about here. In the Bible, 125 times the words pride, proud, or haughty are used in the Bible. And guess how many it's used in a favorable context? None. And we see it. It's number one on God's hate list in Proverbs 6:16 through 19. So, nothing we want to. Humble is how we get close to God. Verse 4. Who have said, he's still talking about these wicked here, the proud and the lying flatterers, he says, that are indistinguishable now from the unsaved. He says, with our tongue we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? In other words, we need not be shackled by the truth here or constrained by facts. Our lips can speak eloquently and persuasively, and the people will believe us. And they're right. They're not constrained by facts, and the people do believe them. And the loudest voice wins, and that's just mobocracy in action. You just keep repeating the lie and saying that the earth is 4.3 billion years old, and without evidence, and people just believe it before long. And now it's treated, it's taught as fact. There's not a scientists believe that, like it was when I was younger. Now it's 4.3 billion years old. And they'll talk about these things as if they were facts, like they were there. But that's changed now. Now it's fact. They don't even have to say scientists believe that. Nope, that caveat is no longer in there. even though they know it's made up, what do we have? Biden saying, I graduated at the top of my class with a full academic scholarship and 3 undergraduate degrees. That's a quote from Joe Biden in 1988 when somebody confronted him, and he was so proud of himself, and he had repeated that lie so many times he actually believed it. That was facts to him. And it wasn't until they said, oh, by the way, sir, the reality is you're at the bottom of your class and you did not get a scholarship. You did not get a full academic scholarship, and you didn't get 3 undergraduate degrees. So false, false, and false. And but you see, we even deceive ourselves with our lips. Then we make the story sound so good, we believe it ourselves, even though we know it's not true. And that's that self-pride. Facts and truth, you don't need to be shackled by them anymore. See what they say here in verse 4? With our tongue we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? The border is secure. But yeah, verse 5. For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now I will arise, says the Lord. I will set him in the safety for which he yearns. The New Living Translation says this. The Lord replies, I have seen the violence done to the helpless, and I have heard the groans of the poor. Now I will rise up to rescue them as they have longed for me to do. And, we're told over and over again to wait on the Lord. And this is the message that the poor and the oppressed and the groaning need to hear. Wait on the Lord. Wait on the Lord. And because this will happen. Now I will rise up to rescue them. But, some people are poor by choice. And that's fine. But when men then step in to take advantage of those poor people, whether they're poor by choice or not, or by their own foolish, acts or whatever, when then they are oppressed by other people in their state of, poorness, God is offended by that, and he'll arise on that against that too. In Psalm 10, 17 and 18 says this. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. Well, that's not true today, is it? But someday it will be. And David saw it. He says, you will cause your ear to hear, and someday the man of earth will oppress no more. Looking forward to that day. Verse 6. The words of the Lord are pure words, like silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Now, 7 times, 7's being the number of completeness. The earth was created in 7 days, and so many other things we see pictured in the number 7 in our Bibles as being complete. But here, it's completely purified 7 times. That means all imperfection and impurity are removed by this process. And that's what he's comparing this to. The word of God being all imperfection and impurity are completely removed. But verse 7, speaking of his words now, just like we saw in verse 6, you shall keep them, O Lord. You shall preserve them from this generation forever. So notice from this generation, and you shall preserve them. And he's talking about his words in verse 6. You shall keep them. And he's done that. This is why we still have our Bibles today. And it's powerful, more powerful than any two-edged sword. And, his word being pure and true, and he's going to ensure that it stays that way. preserved. You will preserve them and ensure that it remains that way. What are the odds that throughout all human history, this book remains with us? And we know it's, from all the 13,000 manuscripts and fragments of manuscripts that all line up with our Bibles today. We know that he has done that, and it can be verified. But he's going to continue to ensure that we have it. You will preserve them forever. In a humorous twist, the very building that was used as the headquarters of those that were organizing the burning and eradication of every Bible in Germany, their headquarters building later housed a Bible printing press. And it's just like men plotting against God. Well, guess what? You built that big building, and that's perfect for a Bible printing press right after they were crushed. Look at verse 8. The wicked prowl on every side when vileness is exalted among the sons of men. What a truth we see today. And why is this? When evil is promoted, like we saw in the first verse here, the faithful disappear, they speak idly, and things like this. Vileness is exalted among the sons of men, and we just see that evil is promoted. What they call social justice by releasing the criminal, and who predictably get released and do the same thing or worse the next day. It's our latest example is the sainting of Luigi. Have you seen that one? This guy, this punk little spoiled brat kid from a rich, wealthy family who ran nursing homes very corruptly, and oppressed the elderly. The rich little brat goes out and decides to as a coward shoot a man in the back as he's walking down the street, and they call him a hero. What is the problem? The problem is the churches today. There's not enough salt. There's not enough salt. Going back to verse 1, vileness is exalted, and that family failed that boy, and it's just terrible. God denying evil is promoted. It's mainstream, and our Bibles, we can hold on to the truth that's in our Bibles, and when we do so, we're called extremists, and we represent a threat. Right? The only thing we threaten, and we do threaten, we threaten their conscience just by being here and trusting in God in our Bibles. We threaten their very conscience, and it torments them daily. And this is why they hate us. It says they slay those who are of upright conduct. No, I'm quoting something else that doesn't come here, but. Bible tells us their sword shall enter their own heart. God sees what they got planned. But evil is promoted today, and that's just the truth of it. And the wicked prowl on every side, like we see here on verse 8. I think, Dave, did you put that on the sign?
No, I didn't. I got that
Different one? Heretic. Just kidding. No, but Dave was going to put this verse 8 on the sign. When vileness is exalted. I guess our message would be, be kind to others, but don't trust any of them. We trust only Jesus. Hebrews 10:23 says, he who promised is faithful. He is worthy of our trust. And in him alone can we fully trust. You really can't fully trust me and any pastors. But you can fully trust Jesus. And it's nice to be able to fully trust in something. Not just Jesus, but we can fully trust in his word because he's going to preserve them, as we saw here in our text today. He is our rock and our salvation, and he is able to keep his word true for us. So that's our psalm today. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Great God, we thank you for this portion of your word. Just pray that you'd help us to